I'm not coming from a clinical or a medical standpoint. I'm just coming from everyday living life, something that regular people like myself and also newbies. One of the things for the book is that I wanted people who just recently got a diagnosis or their parents got a diagnosis for their child. And, to be able to go to the book and say, well, she's really talking really anecdotally first and then on my level.
Howdy, welcome to the See-Through Podcast, a podcast that creates transparency on life with a disability through raw conversations with the disability community. I'm your host, Lance Johnson, and I live and podcast with the eye disease retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. In this episode, I talk with the great Tracee Garner, a book author who has sold over 90,000 copies of her books. In this episode, Tracee talks to me about living with muscular dystrophy, her new self-help book titled Disability, a Guide for the Rest of Us, the inspiration behind her writing, and more. But before our interview begins, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, follow on social media. The handle is at See-Through-Pod. And if you want bonus episodes and exclusive content, join the See-Through Few over on Patreon. The link is in the show description. I hope you enjoy this episode. Tracee Garner, welcome to the See-Through Podcast.
Thank you, Lance. So great to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's 10 a.m. in the morning, so it's like kind of early, but enough time has passed where I've had like 3 cups of coffee already, and pretended enough, to look decent for you on camera here.
Look alive.
You are from the DC area. Do you live in DC?
I do not. I live just outside of DC in Virginia, on the Virginia side. I live 10 minutes from Dulles Airport.
All right. Yeah, my brother lives in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have you on this podcast. We're going to talk about you. Mm-hmm. We're also going to talk about your new book and the other, 14 books you have. You have quite a bit of books.
Yes.
So again, I always think about where do I start these interviews, and I always feel like it's a basic starter question, softball question, but maybe just introduce yourself to everyone.
Sure. So my name is Tracee Lydia Garner. I am a writer. I have 15 books, as you mentioned, and I'm a person with a disability. I have muscular dystrophy. I'm a Jerry's kid. That's all people know. Jerry's Kids telethon every Labor Day of the year. But I've been using a wheelchair since I was in elementary school and getting around, and just really started writing in college. I won a writing contest that got me a trip to New York, $500 advance, which is a lot for a 20-something-year-old and back then, and then publication in the book. And that really changed my life and launched my career, and just helped me fall in love with writing, but also, got better grades and started doing well because I found something that really validated me, and other people said, this is pretty good too. So that really helped my esteem and helped me grow up. Yeah.
You're a very successful writer. I read online that you've sold over 90,000 copies total.
Yeah. As a traditionally published author, I'm now self-published. Haven't quite sold as many in that realm, but I still love it. It's all about writing and sharing stories. And for me, it's really part mental health to process everything that you go through, put it in a book and make it happy instead of the real tragedy that occurred, and make yourself feel better. So that's kind of like my motto for my writing and why I do it.
Yeah, I do the same thing with this podcast, so I relate to that.
Yeah.
And
everybody has something that they are using, I think, is kind of a soothing salve for what ails you. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I agree completely. My grandma, she passed recently, but she had limb-girdle muscular dystrophy.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So that's kind of that was my introduction to muscular dystrophy. And I've had a few guests on this podcast who have had muscular dystrophy.
Yeah, well, she lived a long time with it, so that's always encouraging and good. I'm always looking for like, who's the oldest person living with muscular dystrophy? So I can go talk to them before they kick the bucket. Like, hey, how'd you survive so long? It sounds really morbid, but it's more of a like an affection and a kind of kinship thing.
Yeah. She was a wonderful woman, and so just wanted to share that.
Cool.
I've never shared that on this podcast. I have this podcast about disabilities, but I never have shared that my grandmother had limb girdle muscular dystrophy. All right. So you have this book, and it's called Disability, a Field Guide.
Yes.
For the rest of us. And it kind of has all these different chapters or topics that you cover.
Yep.
And I kind of thought it'd be fun to go through each topic that you cover.
Sure.
We don't have to go over them in like a very long description, but I guess first let's hear about this book, and then we'll dive into it.
Sure. So the book started really as a way to share advice and stories among myself and my friends with disabilities. About 10, maybe probably even 15 years ago, honestly, I was having lunch with some friends with disabilities, about 11 or 12 of us. We're just chatting, and I told them about this book idea that I had. And I was already writing a few. I had like 4 or 5 books out, and they were kind of like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And my original view of the book was that all of them would write chapters and contribute to the book. And, they would have their own chapter. They would be so motivated and inspired by having a byline. And then I would send out, these are the chapters I want to do. Let's get to writing. And then nobody wrote anything except me. So it was so depressing. I was like, so I've just had this book idea for such a long time. And what I decided to do was that, I would have people with disabilities, probably those who I don't know, write volume 2. But I had to start it. I had to kind of redirect the dream about what I thought the book was going to be. And I just said, I'll just write it. I'll just start. And so I really just kind of curated my life a little bit and picked out 9 chapters. There could be 100 chapters, trust me. But I really wanted to touch on some main things: employment, housing, recreation, leisure, caregiving, emergency preparedness. 9 chapters that I decided. It was 8 at first. And then I added caregiving, because I want to have a longer book about some of the caregiver types that I've had in my life over the last 20, 25 years or so. But it's really just the impetus. And I was thinking about, if I were going through a certain situation, let's say I'm having an issue with, do I really want to drive, or do I really want to, take public transit for the rest of my life? Is driving even an option? How would I tell someone else with a disability how to go about navigating these things? I had an instructor. I had a person who taught me how to drive a modified vehicle, a van, and I cried every day. I just did not know if driving was going to be it. But then I also had these hellacious bus drivers. And so I think that, by them being so mean to me, it really motivated me to stick with my driving instructor, to keep trying. I have some of the most extensive vehicle modifications on my vehicle, and they cost so much. So it's like the driving, am I going to get this van? That's another cost. Am I going to, finish with this instructor? And what about funding? What am I going to do, to make this happen? And also how you can cope with if you're not going to be able to drive. A lot of people with disabilities, that is not going to be an option for them because of their, the severity of their limitation. And I probably won't drive forever as my muscles get weaker. These are just little bitter pills to swallow. These are kind of reckonings with your own limitations. And so in each chapter, there are about 15 pages or so. Some are really long, some are short, about, when you're confronted with something, this is what I did. And then at the end of each chapter is take action, how you can, start to mitigate fallout and pitfalls for yourself. So the chapter is really broken up into 3 parts, kind of a key takeaways, Tracee's story, and then take action. And so I wanted really people to be able to reference the book throughout different parts of their lives and throughout being confronted with different situations. Get some anecdotal advice. It's Disability, an Anecdotal Field Guide for the rest of us. and then move on and read it and be on your merry way.
Yeah. So it's in a sense, I guess you wrote this self-help book for people. It covers a variety of topics. You go in depth on your personal experience, right. And then you also do you talk about others' experiences as well?
Sometimes.
Or just yours?
Just right now, it's just mine. It's my baby. Remember all those stragglers I told you who didn't want to join me and didn't know what the heck I was talking about and didn't actually write any of their parts of the book. That's why I decided to go ahead with it as I saw it and the vision. And also, now it's a sample for them. It's kind of this is how she wants it to be written, or this is how I can write it. This is nice and short and sweet. These are the takeaways. And then they can also emulate that. The thing that I thought was, if I did it and showed people, then they could also do it too. I think that was the part that was missing when I was having that luncheon with all my friends, was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how this is supposed to go, when I was already writing and they hadn't written. So had to, kind of do the demonstration, and then others could follow along. And I also had to realize that they just aren't writers. They aren't writer types. Not that they couldn't be at some point, but at that time I wanted to get it done and wanted to have the book out in the way that I wanted. I just had to let that dream go. And that's kind of what disability is sometimes, is letting go of something in order for a different iteration or a different version. That's still exciting and fun. Writing the book alone was still exciting and fun, but it just wasn't quite what I thought it should be. And it still turned out good.
Yeah. I haven't read the book, for those listening, but I can't wait to read it. I do want to add that, this is a nonfiction book, but you also write a lot of fiction. And let's talk about that before we talk about, your new book.
Sure. So I write fiction. I write romantic suspense. My parents had a really great love story. My mom moved up here to Virginia and took a job with the federal government when she was 17. And my dad, they grew up together. They were high school sweethearts, but she came up here, kind of left her small town in Georgia and took a career up here. And my dad actually dropped out of school and came up here to be with her. And they got married, of course, and were married for 40 years before my dad passed away in 2011. But just those kind of little stories of how love starts, how love begins, kind of resonated with me. And, just going through college and suffering rejection from a dude, that I thought was like, he's so wonderful. And then he was a jerk. And it's kind of like put him in my book and made him like this other, larger than life alpha hero. And so I just liked writing stories about that. But of course, it all stemmed from something, my parents' stories that I see, and then characters that you see on the news. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a beginning, a middle, and the end. Usually on the news, though, they only take a snippet. Somebody robbed a bank. Well, why'd they rob a bank? Maybe their child is sick. Maybe they need money for this. There's always some kind of backstory. So that was exciting to me to write about and to try to, cultivate what happened to this person and what made them make the choices that they make. And so they've all been romantic suspense. I love romance, but I also like car chases, fires, things exploding, somebody's trying to kill you. So those things I add in for fun in addition to the romance.
Yeah. And for those listening who want to check out, Tracee's work of books that she's the author of, just go to her website, TraceeGarner.com. I'll have a link in the show description. Yeah, I think you talk about writing from a personal place, and I think that's where the best art comes from. Just personal experience. So, maybe it's a good thing. I definitely think you should explore having your friends help you on the new book, but maybe it's a good thing that your new book was just you.
Yeah, and I actually there's going to be a chapter in the book, and it's already on my website. I'm inviting people to do volume 2. So I do still have that dream of people writing chapters. I give a list of new chapters that we could talk about. Somebody may have built their family through adoption or in vitro fertilization. People can talk about getting married and relationships. There's a number of topics that are still left to explore. My 9 chapters to me is nothing. It's just, barely scratching the surface. and the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more. So I really hope that when all is said and done, I hope I'll have at least 5 volumes, because even on the book that's coming out in January right now with the 9 chapters, it says volume 1 on the cover. And so that implies that there'll be more volumes. And even if we don't actually publish books, my hope is also that there'll be blog posts on the website that kind of emulate what the book started. So, this is going to be never ending for me. It's going to just be something that I continue to curate and continue to almost be like an editor or, a person that gets it all together, helps publish it, and all these people will be published. And what a great opportunity for them too.
Yeah, it's almost like I like to think of things as like in the digital form, right? But your books are, if you keep this going, it's almost kind of like a literary version of a podcast or a documentary, that kind of thing.
Definitely. And digital will be the way to go, because as soon as a book is written, sometimes the information is obsolete. But sometimes it also, people are reading Zig Ziglar, 50 years later, some of the stuff will still be very relevant and still be applicable to people. So whether it's in book form that you can get anytime, or whether it, maybe posthumously, it'll be digitally and somebody can curate that. But just hope that it lives on forever. And that's the wonderful thing about books too. Long after you're gone, they're still here, resonating with people, and still, making an impression upon people, like a legacy that you leave.
Definitely 100%. All right. I think that's a good setup. I think let's get into your book, Disability, a Field Guide for the Rest of Us. Mm-hmm. I guess I'll ask you this first. Actually, scrap that. We're not going to dive into this yet. I want to ask you a question. Who's the rest of us?
The rest of us are just us plain type people. I've never, even though I've written so many books and done all this stuff and won awards and stuff, I just still think of myself as pretty common, pretty laid back, pretty goofy and humorous. Just your average Joanna, so it's just really layman's, I'm not coming from a clinical or a medical standpoint. I'm just coming from everyday living life, something that regular people like myself and also newbies, one of the things for the book is that I wanted people who just recently got a diagnosis or their parents got a diagnosis for their child. And, to be able to go to the book and say, well, she's really talking really anecdotally first, and then on my level. It's not so pie in the sky. There's not so many big words and doctor speak that people use that you can't relate and that you can't really get information from. So I think the tone that I'm setting in my book is also really important, just to help people be able to relate and be able to do what I'm saying. There's nothing in there that's like, I could never do that. That's ridiculous, Tracee. It's all, this seems very doable. A little bit at a time, one step at a time.
Yeah, I think that people appreciate that. I think a lot of people, maybe this is me just making this up. This is how I feel sometimes, that sometimes when it comes to promoting things within the disability community, the language used can kind of be, like you said, there's these long medical terms, and it can kind of turn people away. They just get, to be honest, they just don't understand it. So I think it's nice to have conversations that are just about, the day to day, and just practical things. So yeah.
And also I've been told that I'm encouraging. And so I think that you also have to speak in a way that encourages people. Like, yes, you can do this. Call this number, reach out to your Center for Independent Living, talk to other people, get on Facebook, find support groups. A lot of Facebook support groups are organized by threads. Look for the hashtag, driving, transportation, paratransit, and so I think the snippets and the advice in there is very doable. And people don't want to be, honestly, when you go to a doctor, your doctor is very dismal thinking. Their whole, I tell people all the time, doctors are really just practicing, practicing medicine. They don't have any real, they have people that they've seen, but they haven't really kept up with how it's going. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like when you check in with other people with disabilities, you get to see how it's going, not what the projection is or the prognosis. You know, these are all doctor words. And so sometimes it can just be really annoying, first of all, and really a turnoff because prognosis and diagnosis are often portrayed as very dismal. You know?
Yeah,
and
I agree.
All they ever say is, you know, encourage them to act like their peers and treat them like, what does that mean? You know, like typically functioning. What does that mean? Who's functioning typically? I don't know anybody who's really functioning typically. All these words just, I think they really mess with your head too, because you start to make up your own inference. You start to, and you can get off a track that's depressing and all of a sudden, you know, you don't want to live. And I just think that, you know, a lot of people that we see set the tone, and we really need to check in with other people with disabilities and see how they're coping, see how they're getting through certain situations, see how they're managing to be successful.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think, I think people are starting to come around to the idea that they're, you know, the medical community. I love the medical community. I support, you know, science and, you know, medicine, but I also understand. I don't put all my faith in my doctor because they're going to be in the room with me for like 5 minutes. You know, it's hard without like specialties, you know, like I see a retinal specialist for RP, you know, but like if you go to a general, like your, you know, practitioner or whatever, it's like, they just want to get you in and out, and you know, there's a big difference. I always tell people, like, if you actually want to get somewhere, see a specialist.
Right.
But enough of that.
And not only see specialists, but see other people with similar issues that you have. The other thing about doctors is they don't have what you have, so there's a limited element to what they're going to tell you to do. If they don't have what you don't have, they're going to tell you whatever their textbook told them to tell you.
Exactly.
So, you know, you have to be careful of that. And there's nothing wrong. I love my doctors. I enjoy science. I believe the scientists. But when it comes to some of the day-to-day living aspects, you need other people who are in the doing part to tell you how to best tackle certain issues in your life.
People like you in your book.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's get into it. You said there's 9 chapters. They all have a different topic.
That's right.
The first one you kind of already touched on, but I'd like to ask you a little bit more about it. And the first chapter is transportation. And you talked earlier about modified vehicle.
Right.
You said yours is, you know, pretty decked out and custom.
It is.
I imagine like I used to watch this. I used to watch this show called Pimp My Ride.
Yeah.
When you said that, I had this thought in my head. Maybe it's not the best thought, but I thought it'd be humorous if there was like a Pimp My Ride for disabled drivers, like, because I think it would fascinate people. I think that's fascinating how people modify their vehicles to drive, and it surprises people when, you know, someone who's a wheelchair user gets out of a car, you know. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It does surprise people. And I'm kind of amazed because we're in 2021. People still stop and stare, you know, like they've never seen another person with a disability operate their own vehicle. I realize that they're curious and they have questions, but it's still a little eerie that there just aren't enough of us out there that people haven't seen. But yeah, so I drive completely with hand controls. Almost like driving my wheelchair. And actually on Pimp My Ride, do you know they did an episode where they souped up somebody's wheelchair? It was really cool. It was really cool. I'll have to see if I can find it on YouTube.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
But they did that, and I just thought it was amazing. But yeah, so I don't use my feet. I use my joystick, and I also have what's called a DigiPad. It's a pad that has the brake and the parking, drive, reverse, and neutral, all by pressing a button. So it's pretty good. It's pretty cool. It did take a lot to learn to drive and everything. And it was nerve-wracking, but I still, you know, managed to get my license. But, you know, how are you going to cope even if you can't drive? I mean, that's the real question. Not that I drove and I went through with my instructor, and I actually took the driving test. I had this like woman that I thought she was not nice, and I got a highway restriction. And so I couldn't drive on the highway like out the gate when I got my driver's license, and I got, passed the test and everything. So I was like, I'm going to drive on the highway anyway. And if I get pulled over, I'll just say, I'm practicing. I got to retake my test. I'm practicing. So that never happened, of course, but that was going to be my excuse if I did get pulled over. But so how do you cope even if you can't drive? Driving is not everything. It's a wonderful thing. It's free and it's freedom, but maybe you live in the city. Maybe you live where there's lots of public transit options. And that's another thing as far as in the chapter about housing, I talk about, how, living on your own, might not be an option, but can you still be as independent as possible? Yes, of course you can. Maybe you have to live with a roommate. Maybe you have to have other shared living arrangements. These things are still doable. You can still maintain your autonomy and your independence, but you also have to come to grips with a level of independence that's right for you. And I think that, you have to search within yourself and define that. I may always have someone living with me and need assistance, for daily activities. That's okay. It's a pill, you swallow it, you just drink it down, but you make sure that you have ways in which you can direct your own life. Even if you need help, you have ways that this is how I am independent. And this is okay for me.
Yeah, that's why I live in New York. For public transit, I gave up driving and moved up here because I could use the subway.
Yeah, so everything is right. And even New York has a wonderful transit system. I know some New Yorkers may disagree, but they have, but I've been up there and they have the on-demand system where in 10 to 15 minutes, especially if you're in, Midtown and uptown and downtown, you can get a ride, within 10 to 20 minutes. We don't even have that here. And I'm right outside the DC area. It takes about an hour to 2 hours to get a taxi to your place. And sometimes for paratransit, you need to let them know 24 hours in advance. This isn't the end of the world, but it's still an inconvenience. And it kind of can still remind you that, yes, you have a disability, but, there are ways to mitigate, fallout. Building relationships with friends who have cars. They can take you places. You can go this way and that way, and just really keeping your options open. So there's a way around all of this that people go through. And that's, the main driving points of this.
Yeah. A lot of people complain about the subway, and I won't lie, I do every now and then. But then I kind of remind myself of why I should be thankful for it, and it's all good. Yeah. But my mom lives in I'm from Hope Mills, North Carolina. That's where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And my mom still lives there, and it's a very small town.
Right.
And she has RP, and she's legally blind, mm-hmm. and she relies heavily just on her friends, just to get around and to go, to the grocery store and things like that. So, you got to have. She's very lucky to have the support group she has. So
and it's all about creating a network. You have to create a network. I'm sure they're dependent on her for certain things, and she's dependent on them for certain things. And
definitely,
it's all about a give and take. And honestly, when you really believe that human beings and human capacity, people are willing to help you. You just have to ask. And so you just have to really believe, in the decency of human beings, and that for whatever you need, there's always someone willing to assist, and they would be glad to. They just don't always know how. And, it's up to us to really ask for the assistance that we need. People are out there to help in any situation, I believe.
Yeah, I agree completely. I agree. All right, let's move on to the next chapter, and that is health.
Sure.
And that kind of encapsulates like physical and mental, right?
Physical, yes. There's both a chapter on physical health and mental health. And what I'm talking about in there, just that, for one, in the mental health, is that sometimes we as people with disabilities, we have such a need to want to be counted, to want to participate, that some of the stuff that we're doing is really work. And are we really having fun? Are we really having, a good time? Like when I'm doing advocacy stuff, as much as I love it, it's still real work at the end of the day. And I need to find opportunities where I'm not always doing that. I'm not always speaking up. I'm not always helping someone, demonstrating how to be a good advocate, or just constantly wrapped up in policy and, changing the world, but we really need opportunities just for our mental health, just for our outlets. And the problem sometimes is when people see that you're so strong and they see that you cope with your disability so well, they don't always think you need mental health supports. And so that is really important too, that just because you get along good with your disability doesn't mean that it's sometimes I'm in my bed crying. Like I couldn't go to an event recently over the holiday because the people that are planning it, supposedly friends, chose an inaccessible venue. That hurt. And you just have to deal with it. You just have to deal with that. That sucked. You really wanted to participate. You really wanted to go. You're probably going to, if you want to cry about it, do that. Deal with the feelings that, made that happen. Deal with the insensitivity that some people have, and then have your cry, or however you handle things. Hopefully, things that don't hurt any people, don't do any substance abuse and all that kind of stuff. But, deal with it and realize that it hurt and you have to move on. But sometimes we get labeled as being super, dare I say, super crip, and that we can handle everything. But there are things that come about that are devastating and hurtful, and you have to find a way to deal with that. And being okay with talking to a counselor. I've had a counselor before. I recently had one just to deal with day-to-day issues related to disability, and aging with a disability is becoming more difficult. And so sometimes you have to realize when you have to talk to people, don't think that people with disabilities have this kind of super gene that doesn't sometimes need support or need addressing. And in my physical health chapter, I just talk about how I should have kept swimming. I really wish I'd have kept swimming or doing some kind of regular exercise regimen, especially now that I'm getting older and swimming is a little bit more difficult to do. I used to be a fish. I used to love to swim, especially at camp. I went to MDA camp as a child. You can go until you're 17. I would swim almost every day. And then I just got away from it. You got a career, got your book life, got all these things that impede. But that was really good for my lungs, really good for exercise, and just all of these things that you kind of slowly forget as you move into adulthood. You neglect those things. And now I really need that. I need swimming. I need breathing techniques. I need all these things to prolong my life, but don't get away from them. So it's also cautionary tales in the book about what to try to keep doing. Even if you feel weaker, try to keep doing those things you did and that you enjoyed, when you're in your 20s and teens.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I kind of relate to that a lot right now because I've been really busy lately, and I've been doing a lot for this podcast as well as just my work that actually makes me money. Yes. But and sometimes when I get real busy, I notice that I don't exercise, and I maybe eat a little more unhealthy, and then you can kind of get in this cycle and routine before you know it. You've lost progress you've made, in physical health, and then you got to work hard, and then just to get back to where you were.
Right.
And then also talking about, what you're talking about with mental health, I think some people are afraid to talk to you. They're afraid to touch on the subject there because I think they're afraid they're going to say something offensive, or so they just, better safe than sorry is their mindset. So I'm just not even going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another example of that is, I had a really, sometimes I'm looking for caregivers, and, the pandemic really obliterated the caregiver industry. They're hard to find, find people to render care and render aid. And, one time I said to someone very close to me, I wish I didn't need help. And instead of saying, I know that's hard. I know that's hard to deal with. Do you want to talk about it? They said to me, well, you do. And I'm just like, thank you, Captain Obvious. This is not what I need to hear right now. I don't need confirmation of what I've already know. I need kind of a willing and listening ear to say, yes, but, needing help is okay. You'll find someone, that encouragement piece, not, yeah, you do. You just wanted to like punch somebody in the face at that point in time. Like, I'm saying that I hate this and you're reminding me that this is what I need despite my hating. Yeah. What I needed was, just the encouragement. Like I said, listening, saying, well, is there anything I can do to help you find additional care? Can I pay for an ad? Ads are expensive. Got to pay for Indeed. Indeed charges you just to have people send applications. So all these things, sometimes people focus on the wrong thing instead of asking you, don't state the obvious. We already are aware. We're painfully aware. I am painfully aware of the assistance that I need. I don't need to be reminded that, but you do need help. So, how else can we, and I want to write a book on that, like 10 things to say, during grief, or 10 ways to help. If we could just get back to that, bringing over, a lunch or a dinner after someone passes away, these little things that we've really gotten away from, what to say instead of, grabbing foot and inserting it into mouth. What should I do instead? And so I think people need reminding of some of those things.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, able-bodied people, since they don't live with a disability, like on the day to day, I think some able-bodied people are cocky that if they were in your situation, that they would just be able to have this glowing positive mindset just because they're wired differently. They're built different. And I think that's very naive because they're not in the day to day. And I think a lot of able-bodied people probably would crumble after a day.
It's true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like, I think they underestimate how resilient the disabled community is. And I sometimes when you hear things like, well, you do need help, you're just like, you want that to, if someone's going to say that, it better be, someone else in your situation,
Right.
So,
right.
So it's just know your place, it's just like, is what I'll add to that. And then you just talked a little bit about, employment, and that's the next chapter I wanted to talk about. Is there, I do know that I read somewhere that disabled people are half as likely to be unemployed than someone who's not disabled.
That's right.
Why is that? And what are the challenges with employment?
There are so many challenges with employment. I would say that the largest challenge, though, is the attitudinal barriers that we face when we go to someone who's in a position to hire us. They, have a number of excuses why it doesn't work or why they think that we can't do the job. And they don't know us from Adam. That's the first thing, is that when I, for my day job, I help people, get Social Security and get benefits. Social Security doesn't care that the man who's in or the woman who's in a position to hire you won't hire you. Their thing is about your inability to work or not. So many of us can work with some supports and with some reasonable accommodations. But then you tell someone that and the employer is like, well, how much is this going to cost me? And it's like, man, it's not even your money. There are federal things in place to pay for that. There are tax incentives for making things accessible, but everybody's running around acting like we're digging into their pocket in order to make the accommodations. The accommodations always, this is something that they tout on all employment websites for people with disabilities, cost under $500. The last time I needed an accommodation for my desk was to make it a little bit higher. You know what I did? I used a phone book. You know how hard it was? The hardest thing about that was I couldn't find a freaking phone book. Like nobody even knows what a phone book is, and nobody has any. So when you really think about accommodations, we know what we need. And oftentimes we have it, or we can creatively problem solve to get it. So, that's one thing, is the attitudinal barriers that exist in the workplace by people with ignorance and small minds. That's really what it boils down to. The second thing is that, when I was younger, I got my first job at 16, and I got placed through something like the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, or DARS. It's different in every state. It's called something different, but that is a state agency to help you find employment and to help place you. And sometimes they foot the bill of your salary. So they're basically giving people a free employee. And then people's eyes are opened and changed. Wow, you're disabled, but you really are a good hard worker. You're a go-getter. They're trying to make us attractive to people and show that we can work. And then the hope is that they'll hire us on their own, without the government assistance, without the federal funding to pay our salaries. So the other thing is just get as much experience as you possibly can. For a lot of people with disabilities, my age, and older, we didn't have the experience that we needed. When people that are not disabled are out playing sports, trying lots of different things, basketball, football, soccer, that is developing what they will and won't like to do long term. And it's also developing leadership qualities in them. And sometimes when we don't have those experiences, we don't know what we like to do and what is going to be fun to us. And so I just encourage people to get as much experience doing as many varied things as they can from, 10 to 15, from year 8 to, as long as you're able to do something, try different things, enroll your kid in different camps, go to everything free, really start to hone in what type of personality they have and what type of work they would like to do. Because when other kids were playing soccer and doing things that we couldn't do, they were developing their skills, not only to apply to work, but just to apply to the type of person that they were going to be. And so I had a lot of different jobs, until I was about 25. I worked at a daycare. I worked for a temp agency. And so many people just get typecast into just these roles. They don't have any creative say. They don't even like it. They just do it because someone told them, well, you're disabled. These are the jobs that are going to fit you. And that's no fun. Yeah. That's no fun at all.
Yeah, I have a friend. His name's John Marin, and he lives here in New York, and he runs a program called the Career Discovery Project, where he helps find internships for visually impaired high school students. And he talks about how if those students were to go through a different program, that they would get these these type of internships that the students aren't passionate about. They would get some very tedious job. Whereas if they go through his internship, they're getting jobs in like a creative field and audio, and then they're actually building skills that they want to learn versus like being written off. Oh, you're disabled and you should just take whatever job you can get.
Right.
And I think there's a lot to that. Just trying to figure out what you actually enjoy. Don't let. I think that's a good advice, probably, to never let the government tell you what to how to live, I guess. Yeah,
the government and even the personality tests. You take the Myers-Briggs, and also your disability. What people see you doing and what you are actually capable of are two very different things. I wish I went into more graphic design. I love graphics, especially as I've gotten older. I wish I could, design more of my own book covers. I actually did the book cover for the disability book. I don't feel confident trying it for the fiction, but I want to. It's just something that I want to explore. I wish I had if somebody said, why don't you do graphic design? I'm still sitting. I'm still just at a computer. That would have fit into their limiting mindset about what I could do physically. But I just never, now kids get to do gaming and get to build games and build computers and do graphic design and do video technology. And I just love that so much now. I do my own book trailers. I do my own videos for my books. In my press kit, there's a video that I edited and put together. So I just wish, there had been the counselors that are in a position, wish they had have been more, open to what we all could do. Because first of all, we'd be happier doing something that really resonated with us.
Exactly.
And we'd be able to make, probably a better living honing in on that and drilling down to become a professional at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. And I think, if you really want to break it down, I always think about things like on this podcast, I always like to focus on the mental side of things, the mental side of adapting, and everything adds up. So like, you mentioned playing sports, you mentioned being passionate about having a career you're actually enjoy. Mm-hmm. All those things help with mental health. You can't have one without the other almost. And it's like, there's a bunch of different pieces to the puzzle, and like every little thing helps. And I think that's why I like this structure of this book, is because it has these very specific chapters that are all these topics, mm-hmm. And you're breaking it down. And I think it's just, I don't know, that sometimes knowledge is power, so like the more you know about all these different topics, the more you can adjust your life, the more it's going to help you. And I think that I'm seeing the point of your book, So let's keep it going. The next chapter is advocacy. And that's a big one because, it's the year 2021. There's a lot going on in that world. And I was going to ask you, like, is there a difference between advocacy and activism?
Yeah, I think so. I was going to say I don't think so, but now that I think about it, activism to me is a more outward demonstration of that you're advocating for someone. So activism, I think it can be kind of you just, at home doing things to help people, but I think of it more as a outward demonstration. The Black Lives Matter marches, to me, that is real activism. But I also think that they are advocating, for a certain group of people, for equality and social justice and racial justice. I consider myself an advocate for both myself and others as other people with disabilities, through speaking up, through giving testimony, through trying to influence policy. And I also had some really great advocates in my parents, which is what I talk about, that they first demonstrated how to be an advocate for myself. So to me, advocacy, like I said, is focused on speaking up for a group or a group of people. And then the activism, and this could totally be wrong, but these are my impressions of what they are. Activism is more outwardly public facing approach to advocacy, because you're really getting involved. You're really getting out there. You can be an advocate, I think, at home. I'm not sure you can have as much activism, because it seems to me it's more footwork, really getting out there and really, demonstrating. So that's kind of the component that I think deciphers between the two. But I still think that I'm, both. I haven't been to any rallies per se, but I still speak up. I still go to locally, you have those board meetings. You meet with the board of supervisors. They're getting ready to affect policy or make some kind of changes. You go there, you get to do your 3-minute talk about, why you should or shouldn't do something. That is, to me, is still activism also. But I'm advocating for myself and others. And so the chapter is just about two programs that I went through that taught me how to be a better advocate for myself. And I think they're in almost, I want to say 30 to 40 states. Partners in Policy Making is one of them, and the Youth Leadership Forum. Those are programs. The Youth Leadership Forum is for high school seniors and juniors that have disabilities. And so they get to go to a college campus and stay for a week. And throughout the day, they have these learning modules and things about being an advocate. And then Partners in Policy Making is for both self-advocates and adults, and also parents of children with disabilities. And it's a 9-month program where you just stay overnight, one night. It's usually Friday all day and Saturday half a day. and you just stay in your state's capital to learn different things, and they have different speakers come in. I went through both of those programs in my 20s. It was just a wonderful experience, and it helped me really identify what my story was and how I could articulate that to people in a position of power to make decisions that are ultimately going to affect my life, you know?
Yeah. I think that, programs like that, I don't hear too much about them. And that's very unique. I think that people should take advantage of specific programs to help you, because there's a big thing right now with social media. I think a lot of people rely on social media for their, that's their program, social
Right.
media posts and their community online. And we could probably talk about that a lot. Like, there's probably a huge generational differences between, the younger disabled community versus, the let's just say the older,
The old heads like myself.
So, but here's the thing. So you have 9 chapters of the book. We've covered up to advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be able to get to every chapter.
Sure.
But that's fine, because people have to read the book, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point. I want to promote your book. So, the topics we haven't talked about yet are housing. Mm-hmm. We talked about we didn't talk about recreation, caregiving, and then emergencies, with caregivers and whatnot. And I'm kind of bummed because, I want to keep this conversation going, but I also want you to sell your book.
That's right.
And even though, you talked about these other topics in your book, you go way more in depth. So, go to Tracee's website, TraceeGarner.com, and you can buy, Disability, a field guide for the rest of us there, as well as you can check out her fiction work too. Well, I could talk to you forever, Tracee. This has been a lovely conversation, and you really know your stuff, and that's why I brought you on, and I can't wait to read your book and to stay in touch with you.
Sure. You too.
And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, I value your time. So, like I said, if people want to buy your book, it's available now, right?
It is available now for pre-order. So it will be delivered to you on January 7th, which is the official release date.
Yeah, you can start your new year, with some words of wisdom,
And
straight
it's
from Tracee.
Also on NetGalley. So until January 1st, it'll be on NetGalley. You only have to have a free membership. You can download the book as a PDF or as an ebook, and you'll be able to read it for free right now, but just until January 1st. And then it'll be, delivered to people's inboxes if they pre-order.
Awesome. All right, Tracee, I'll let you get back to your day. Enjoy the rest of it. And I can't wait to put this episode out, but take care.
Thanks so much, Lance. You too.